everybody. Thank you for tuning in for this special Pride Month conversation. My name is Raissa, and I will be the moderator. Today, we talk about a group who gets lost in the immigration debate, the LGBT+, people of color and minorities, asylees, and refugees. With more than 800,000 migrants currently applying for asylum in the US, African Services Committee calling attention today to the group of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people, many of whom are seeking asylum because of persecution back home for their gender identity and sexuality. Immigrants, asylum seekers, and refugees, what's the difference? What are the unique challenges faced by LGBTQ people of color, asylees, and refugees, and what kind of work African Services Committee is doing on that specific issue in the New York scene? Before we start the conversation, for those who don't know African Services Committee, let's have a short introduction of this Harlem-based organization celebrating 40 years of service. The introduction is made by Joyce Ollunga, the Executive Director. Over to you.
African Services Committee is a nonprofit organization based in New York City. As a human rights nonprofit organization, we are dedicated to providing health equity and economic self-sufficiency to our communities. We were founded in 1981 by an Ethiopian refugee to help other newcomers settle in New York. Part of our programs include services for our community in healthcare, in housing, legal immigration, education through English as a second language, and social services. We provide these services to at least 10,000 people per year. And we also provide advocacy and policy work for Africans in the diaspora, both in the US and abroad. Our global outreach includes 7 health clinics in Ethiopia that has put us in the forefront of the global HIV and AIDS pandemic. And we provide in Ethiopia free voluntary counseling, training, and testing for adults, as well as nutritional programs for children in Ethiopia, underprivileged children in Ethiopia. At the moment, we are a voice for the immigrant community in New York, and this we carry out largely through our advocacy and policy work, and we have been in the forefront of changing policy or being on the table where policy has been changed in order to protect the rights of our immigrant African and diaspora and Caribbean diaspora community in New York.
Thank you, Joyce, for this introduction. To talk about LGBTQ, asylees, and refugees, with us 3 ASC team members: Amanda Lugg, Director of Advocacy and LGBTQ Programming at ASC. She runs an LGBTQ program that she coordinates. Nathalie Weeks, a mental health counselor at ASC for many years and for many immigrants in New York City, including asylees and refugees. She is associated with the ASC LGBTQ program. And then Franco Torres is the head of legal department at ASC that provides a variety of legal services, primarily immigration legal services. All right, let's start with a couple of definitions. Franco, what's the difference between a refugee and an asylum seeker?
Basically, the difference between a refugee and asylee is basically where you're applying for sanctuary from. So if you're a refugee, you're applying from outside of the country to the country where you want to get sanctuary or refuge in. And if you are an asylee, then you are already within that country and you are applying for that country to protect you and allow you to remain within their border. So it's just where it is that you start the process. Do you start outside of the country or do you start inside of the country that you want to stay in?
Thank you, Franco. Amanda, what exactly means LGBT today?
Yeah, we've come through quite a few changes over the decades, but currently LGBTQ+ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, plus the other gender identities that we now know of, which include asexual, gender fluid, two-spirit, and I may be missing one here, but basically by 2021, we've understood the fluidity of sexuality in human beings, and the LGBTQ plus seeks to provide an umbrella for all of those identities.
Thank you. Although being LGBT is absolutely not a mental illness, many LGBTQ people experience mental health struggles. So it's important to recognize how the experience of sexual orientation and gender identity relates to mental health. Nathalie, I am curious, have you experienced clients not knowing or still questioning their sexual identity?
Actually, that's a good question. Yes, I do have clients who've presented with that dilemma, with that lack of full confidence about their sexuality, or even to have been able to have learned it within their own cultures and countries, what can even be allowed or expected or imagined. And so that's a really lovely way of opening up the idea that you can give somebody the opportunity to explore, and in many different ways. So
that's interesting. We will probably come back to it a bit later. Amanda, some foreign governments in Africa, in Central America, and the Caribbean, among others, have failed to effectively address discrimination, the violence against the LGBT people. So the migration to the United States represents, for some people, a chance to redeem their identity and to live life free from persecution. So can you explain how you do advocacy? What's African Services Committee best practices on addressing this particular issue in New York?
We've worked in solidarity, which here in New York, being where the United Nations is, many times we've attended meetings at the UN, and also we've taken part in demonstrations, namely with the Embassy of Nigeria, regarding their laws, 14 years imprisonment for someone found guilty of same-sex practices. And similarly from Uganda, which most recently, I believe it was in May, where the Senate finally passed the anti-homosexuality bill, and right now it's waiting for Museveni's signature.
And even recently in Cameroon, 2 transgender women have been sentenced to 5 years in prison for attempted homosexuality after they were arrested for the clothes they wore in a restaurant. And in West Africa also, for example, in Senegal, being homosexual is considered a crime, and it's punishable by law since 1966.
I think what's interesting, making the link with our program here at African Services, is the number of members of our program that we have are pretty much delineated by those from the Caribbean and those from Nigeria and Uganda.
Thank you, Amanda. Let's understand now LGBTQ rights and the law. Franco, how African Services Committee helps with the legal aspect?
There are a variety of ways. I think the main process that we help people with is with asylum, and basically applying for refuge here because of the persecution either they faced or their fear of future persecution in their country. Other ways that we can help them is if somebody from the community has a partner that they're married to, we can help them be able to petition for them to be able to get a green card in the United States. For victims of violence here domestically within the United States, even whether it's partner violence or whether they're a victim of a violent crime or a hate crime within the United States, there's a special visa called the U visa, which is for crime victims in the United States who have suffered certain crimes, suffered certain injuries, and have cooperated with law enforcement. So sometimes we're able to help people get a green card through that process. So I think those are kind of the different main cases that we see, but I would say overwhelmingly most of the people from the LGBTQ plus community are coming for asylum, and then that's what we help them with.
Could you explain us what qualifies people for persecution under asylum?
The easiest one to understand is like physical violence against you. So have you been beaten? And have you been beaten? Have you been harmed? Have you been kidnapped? Have you has somebody basically assaulted your person in some way? And then that's part one. Part two has to be that you are able to draw a connection between that harm that occurred to you and that it is your identity that was the motivation for that. So you're really looking for, not only did somebody physically harm you, but you're looking from the person that they said, they insulted them, they said derogatory comments about their sexuality or their identity, and that was why that abuse was coming. Threats are sort of the second level, that, threats that people, threats that people issue. I'm going to do this to you because I know that this is your lifestyle and this is the way that you lead your life. So you're gay, you're lesbian, you're bi, you're transgender. I hate you. I'm going to do this to you if you stay around here. Me and this group of people are going to do this harm. So that's the second level. And then the third one is kind of like, these things happen to you or you're discriminated and you go to appeal to the government for help. You go to the police, you go to advocate, and the government shows hostility or worse, abuse to you because of those things. And so when you fall outside of that box, when you see it happen to other people and you're like, well, I don't want to be beat up in order to have it proved to me that this happens in my country. But unfortunately, when you get here on the asylum side and you're looking at the officer or you're looking at the immigration judge, they are looking for those things to have happened to you. And so if it's just a general sort of fear and hostility, that can make your claim weaker. Because if you're able to show that one of those three levels of harm happened to you, then you've established some form of past persecution. And now it's the American government's responsibility to show that if you go back, that won't happen to you again. And so it shifts the burden in terms of who has to prove what in the case. If one of those three things hasn't happened to you and it's not documented, then the burden is on you as the applicant to show that when you return, you specifically, when you get off that plane, that's what's going to be waiting for you there. And that's a harder, higher burden to prove, because you have to prove something that hasn't happened yet to you is going to happen. And I mean, we use country conditions and we use the examples of other people, but it's really making it personal to you. I understand that this has happened to 1,000 people in your country. Why are you going to be 1,001?
Nathalie, what are the different roles that the mental health professional can play when it comes to assisting and supporting this community?
We know that discrimination and persecution of gay people or perceived gay people in the United States exists. We absolutely know that. So definitely any of our clients and people seeking asylum are subject to that just as much as anybody else. But of course, having this close alliance between the mental health professional and the attorney who's representing each case is really vital. And what the mental health professional can do is, and what I have been able to do, is to develop that safe haven that's culturally competent. And I mean the word cultural in the broadest possible sense, including the person's country of origin, language, education, everything that you can think of, and ultimately, of course, the association or the belonging and the sense of belonging to LGBTQ communities. So it's got to be this non-judgmental, empathic-laden relationship that is going to ensure the support that every person needs, because they can face any number of these kinds of situations that Franco and you are alluding to. So and advocacy is always at the top of the list.
Yes, indeed, advocacy is at the forefront. So Amanda, what challenges you encountered with the LGBT program?
I think for us over the last 4 to 6 years has been the effect of the backlog on immigration hearings, on asylum hearings. And as a result of that, people's work permits, renewals of work permits, it's like people are like in a hamster wheel. They're just going and going and repeating and repeating. And for some, it's taking 4, 5+ years to still, where they're still waiting for their initial interview after arriving in the country. What we saw with the last administration was a complete flip in terms of asylum hearings, where it was before first in, like first people to apply would naturally be at the top of the list to get their first interview. But the last administration switched it where as soon as you applied for your asylum, you could be pretty sure that you'd receive an interview within that first 3 months, which sounds great to anyone who's not in that immigration asylum world. But of course, 3 months is nowhere near the amount of time necessary to be able to find an available lawyer, but also to build that relationship with that lawyer, to speak to the trauma that these folks have very recently experienced, and for the lawyer to be able to build a substantial case.
So, Franco, can you bounce back on that? What challenges you've been facing with those type of cases?
Actually, we just had a recent update from both of the local asylum offices to let us know sort of where their numbers are at. And like you said, we have global numbers, so it's hard to tell how many of those cases are LGBTQ plus cases. But overall, between the 2 primary offices that serve New York City, they currently have about 300,000 plus applications for asylum that need to be heard for an initial interview. And right now the backlog, it goes all the way back to about September, October of 2015. So that means that people who applied in September of October of 2015, it is now 6 years later and they still have not had their initial interview about that claim. And that's disastrous for people who are fleeing and seeking asylum, because country conditions shift and time is really your enemy, because what will end up happening is that your case is decided and evaluated on the situation for your case and the country that you're seeking refuge from the day you go to the interview. So 6 years ago, you fled for your life because there was an urgent threat for you. Now, 6 years later, one of the rationales that they can use to deny your case is to say, well, 6 years has passed. Can you show us that these people are still targeting you? Can you show us that you're still subject to threat? That if you were to go back after 6 years, that these people would even know where to find you? And so it's really, really, I mean, a terrible thing that to happen, that if you would have been heard right away, everybody would have understood this happened, it's immediate, if I go back now, I will be in danger. And now, because you've had to wait, because the system has not given you a timely hearing, now they're going to use that time against you. Also, if you need evidence, if you need information, if you need corroboration, people may have relocated, people may have died. It may be difficult to track down information that you need for the hearing. And things like that. So, I mean, and as Amanda was saying, the policy used to be, you know, you will be seen in the order your call was received or the order that your application was received. And now it's flipped, and that policy from the previous administration has not been rescinded. It's still last in, first out. So any application that is 100 days or less that's in the system is a priority above any other application, including those people who are waiting since September of 2015 to be heard. And so they're going to be heard first. And as Amanda was talking about earlier, for us, it's extremely difficult to have that quick of a turnaround. When you sit down with a person and they've just gotten here, they don't necessarily, you know, people don't necessarily stop to collect all of the evidence that they could possibly have or even know what they might need when they get here to apply for asylum. They're fleeing for their lives. They're grabbing what they can and trying to get out as quickly as possible. So you need time in order to build that record and to document, you know, the harm that they will tell you about. But sometimes that will mean that you need to go to the country that they came and get certain documents or get affidavits, you know, and get them certified from the people who are testifying in that country in order to give them a certain weight and validity. So it's really a messed up situation because it's hurting you on both sides. The new people don't have enough time to develop their cases properly, and the people who have been in the system for 6 years plus are being hurt because their claims are getting what they consider stale because it's been so much time since they initially applied.
Last month, the Biden administration lifted the US cap on refugees from 15,000 to more than 62,000 people. So Franco, what does it mean? What impact? And would it be helpful?
I mean, it is helpful because those are the people who have been displaced from their country that are somewhere else from outside and are seeking to come to the US. Oh. So the fact that they've increased the number of people that they're going to admit is actually great because they'll pre-qualify. They don't, you know, it's not that they have to make their whole case abroad, but they just have to show enough evidence to sort of show a basic case and then be able to come and then do the rest of the case here. And so giving more people that opportunity helps because being in a refugee camp in a country that's not going to extend any kind of like permanent residence or asylum to you is not the best situation to be in. So at least by, you know, having a visa that will allow you to come to the United States as a refugee and then continue the process here, that's great. And it's different than the asylum. Now you're going to be subject to, you know, when you put your application in for asylum, now to this, you know, last in, first out and being, you know, and the backlog.
Thank you, Franco. So although ASC is serving now people coming from all over the world, the primary audience is African and Caribbean people, my people. And in my culture, for example, homosexuality is something that we don't talk about. It's very a sensitive topic. Nathalie?
The primary reasons in my experience have been the taboos associated with anything that might even resemble or suggest homosexuality, which is, you know, how people would refer to it. I mean, these taboos, they're religious, they're cultural, they're extremely rigid. There's family shame associated with anyone who identifies as, you know, non-conventional in terms of sexuality. There's belief in the curse of Western culture and the impact that the West has had on individuals in these countries. And of course, we've talked about the laws against homosexuality in so many countries. And really importantly is the fears against repression of family members who still remain in the country. So often, the people we are working with in our programs, Amanda and I and Franco, they're extremely fearful of, having their photographs picked up or having them, being identified, because that is a very real threat in their home countries. And, I think also that even when there are members of the community or even relatives of some of our clients are here in this country, they kind of discover the freedom of discriminating against their own family members, or even their own, country identified individuals.
Irony here too, though I don't mean to sound flip, but when Nathalie's talking about the taboos, particularly around religion, and of course it was the colonialists, it was those from the West who colonized West, East, Southern Africa that brought that discrimination to the populations that they were colonizing. There were no religious laws about homosexuality in pretty much all of the countries. This is what we hear from advocates in the Global South. There were no laws. It was through religious instruction by the missionaries and those colonialists that brought those taboos and discriminations to those communities that unfortunately continue that trend.
Right.
Very interesting. I have another one for you, Amanda. Those other LGBTQ organizations take a stand on LGBT people of color and minorities, asylees and refugees issues?
Absolutely, yeah. Here in the United States, immigration organizations, there's the Immigration Equality, there's the national organizations. They work on the federal level in terms of advocacy. I think we could describe African Services advocacy as more on the personal level, the one-on-one, both through the services we provide through the program and of course the advocacy by the client's lawyer for their case.
What makes African Services Committee different?
Yes, there are many places that people can go for those immigration services. But what's different about the program that we provide at African Services is that commonality of trauma that all of our members have. For instance, there may be other community-based organizations that provide services to immigrants, but being an immigrant and an LGBT asylee, you're coming from two very different places, quite literally. And so the program where we offer a bi-weekly support group, we have one-on-one mental health counseling, and also provide job readiness and educational referrals for training. All of those within the cultural context of the African diaspora really provides a place of safety, a familial space that folks are all joined together through their common trauma, and at the same time can support each other to survive and move on from that space within a community.
Thank you. So before I forgot, the film, The Legend of the Underground, had its world premiere this month at the Tribeca Film Festival. And African Services Committee's LGBTQ program has been featured in this movie, in this documentary, especially one of your sessions, Nathalie.
I think that it just happens that one of our members in our LGBTQ program, who also was receiving individual therapy counseling from me, a man who had been severely traumatized in his country, Nigeria, is very artistic, and he somehow, through this community that he was involved in, was discovered by a filmmaker, an up-and-coming filmmaker, who very much wanted to create a film about his story and then to generalize that story so that it would capture the stories of many people who had fled Nigeria specifically. And so she went to Nigeria and met people underground, you know, whose names were given to her by my client. And then she filmed and she interviewed them, and then she came back to New York, and she came to African Services and interviewed him and some of the other clients here. And then I remember that she also, with my client's permission, filmed part of our session together. This film has been aired on the Tribeca Film Festival, so we're very eager to not only learn more about it, but to gather some idea of the extent to which it has, you know, captured an audience that's much, much broader.
I forgot to add that it's on HBO. It's been broadcast on HBO since June 29th. Amanda, do you want to add something?
Everyone tune into that. But what I found really interesting, and is something I'm sure that Nathalie could speak more to, is the effect of the transition from the home country to the US. One might think that as soon as one lands in the US, you've gone through your immigration, you know, your work with an immigration lawyer, and then, you know, life is grand. But no, as explained in this film, the guilt that is felt by many who have been able to make it out. They've made it out, they've made it to the US, and they're living the life that they all dreamed of. But there's a feeling still of deep guilt, of some, I guess you would call it survival guilt.
Yeah.
We heard about it, you know, like in 9/11 or any awful, you know, tragedy where someone survives and loses or has to leave behind their friends or loved ones. They've made it out, but their colleagues, their friends are still living under these death threats back home. And what does that do to the individual who's here in the US living the life, as one would say?
Franco, you mentioned earlier in the conversation challenges with the cases, with the backlog, but what about your relationship with the client? How you tackle communication barrier, for example?
I think some of the things that we've touched on, I think there's first a kind of a reluctance to kind of come forward and self-identify in that way, particularly still being in your community. I think the bias doesn't stop at the border when people come over. And so they're very sort of afraid of the people around them finding out. And so, like, for example, even when you're working with someone, you have to be very cognizant that you shouldn't, I mean, you know, as an attorney, you always have to protect privacy and privilege, but that extends to the people that are like very much in their house. So you may not be able to send mail to them, or they don't want mail from immigration coming in there because they don't want to explain to their family what kind of process. And so a lot of this is kind of those initial sort of barriers that they don't have the answers to those questions. They're like, I don't want, you know, I am afraid of this situation in my country, but I don't want people to find out. So is immigration going to send stuff to my house? Are they going to come to my house? I don't want the people that I live with to know, you know, about my lifestyle. I don't want them to know that I'm applying and why it is that I'm applying to do this. I think another thing is really the capacity or lack of capacity of nonprofit organizations in general. It's really kind of a saturated situation, and the backlog, right, doesn't help because you still have these cases that are unresolved, which makes it difficult for you to take on new cases. So there's a lot of discouragement out there because they will go to various organizations and they will hear no a lot. And so, after a certain period of time, there's just a discouragement that sets in that I can't, like, nobody's going to take my case. Nobody's going to help me. I'm tired of telling my story over and over and reliving that trauma, all for somebody to tell me, yeah, that's a really bad situation. Yes, you are eligible for asylum. No, we cannot help you. So I think, those tend to be the two main factors.
So what makes African Services Committee different?
And we actually have a reputation of being a very good place to advocate for people who are from the LGBTQ plus community, because we have done so many cases. And what surprised me at first and no longer surprises me is how many people outside of the African diaspora are aware of that reputation and come to us from other countries because they understand that we've done these cases for people with their identity. And so we actually get, just this week, we got calls from people who are from Russia, from the Philippines, and from Central America. And so we have that reputation of not only having these additional sort of services that do that, but that as an immigration legal department, we understand the issues and we understand how to advocate for these when it comes to the asylum office or it comes to the immigration court.
I will end with that question: how people can get involved?
We can always use more help. The more help we have, the more people we can serve in terms of providing legal services. We're always looking for people to help us be able to translate not only the colonial languages that people speak, but also the actual dialects from various countries, because sometimes that is actually what people are more proficient in or able to communicate best. And for us, particularly when trying to relate someone's experience, it's always best that they say it in whatever language it is that comes more naturally to them, rather than trying to figure out how to fit that into a language that is not necessarily something that they feel comfortable or proficient speaking. We can always use people to help us do research on country conditions. The more up to date we keep up with what's happening in each country and how people are being persecuted or denied their basic human rights, that makes that portfolio that we can present to the asylum office or to the immigration court that much bigger and stronger on their behalf. And anybody that ever wants to come and volunteer for case support to help us help people get documents, draft statements, do anything like that, we can always use that help in the legal department, because then that means that we have the capacity to help more people. These cases are intensive, they take time, they take a lot of work. If you're going to do a good job, you have to put a lot of care and effort into it. So the more hands you have on deck to be able to do that, the better.
I think in that vein of, how to support this effort, this initiative, this important initiative, it's just to continue to raise it in every possible situation. I mean, to always, and to invite people to participate in the creation of support activities, support groups, anything like that. Of course, even in terms of material contributions, that's also very, very helpful. Especially, I'm thinking about these people who have waited 4 to 5 years, who are in, terrible situations in terms of their ability to exercise any way of purchasing what they need in life. Energizing our graduates to speak out for themselves on behalf of the organization and articulating their own life experiences, giving them the support to do that is so helpful. Arranging interviews and facilitating those connections with other community supports and agencies. And, we're also very cognizant of the value of the story exchange and the ability to tell one's story and to develop empathy through the listening, the deep listening that we're capable of.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Amanda, Nathalie, Franco, for your time, for your knowledge. Thank you for watching. And for more information, please visit the website, africanservices.org, or check our social media on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Take care.